This is Matt, and these are the vintage vinyl albums for April 2020. Evil was an obscure Danish speed metal band that put out a mini LP in 1984 and then soon after disappeared. However, the band had some interesting metal connections and maintains a bit of a cult following, making this single album something of a collector's item. Formed in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1982 by a group of fellas with some rather fun names: Kim Christmas, Pete Popcorn Hurricane, Pearl Angel, and Freddie Wolf, the last of which might actually be real. Evil's message was released on Rave-On Records. Yes, that Rave-On Records, the same mysterious label that released Merciful Fate's debut EP. Though, maybe not a surprise, considering both are Danish bands. Regardless, production on this record is pretty comparable to that of the Fate record. In fact, some similarities in music can be heard, though the musicianship in Evil doesn't quite measure up to that of Merciful Fate. My guess is that the two bands have some similar inspirations, such as Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, but the translation varies a bit with each. Still, Evil's record is fairly listenable. Out of the 5 tracks on this record, the best of the lot is The Devil Wants Me. A fun little rumor, perhaps one even useful for the band, is that guitarist Kim Christmas was really King Diamond. The desperate plausibility is certainly there. Both share the same real first name, both are from Denmark, both had releases on Rave-On Records, and it probably didn't hurt that Merciful Fate actually had a song named Evil. Regardless, not only is the rumor false, but the actual Kim Christmas died in 2018. And last I checked, King Diamond is still among the living and working on a new album. And for those who love run-out text on the vinyl, Side A's Dead Wax says, "Evil's power," and Side B says, "is not to be taken lightly." According to what very little information is out there, the band did plan on doing a full-length LP after this, but the label wasn't interested and the band split up soon after. As far as I know, this is the only official pressing of the album, but there was an unofficial release of it on Picture Disc in 2007 through Metalized Blood Records. If you're wanting an original press, expect to pay between $55 and $70 for a so-so quality condition record. It should also be said that the band reformed in the 2010s and released their second album in 2015 called Shoot the Messenger through Mighty Music. Yeah, okay, the album art is a little bit hokey, and with song titles like Take Good Care of Your Balls, you might dismiss this album out of hand. But it's a solid underground metal record of its time, a bit of a cult curiosity as well, and I'd at least recommend checking it out. The 9th studio album from Deep Purple brings with it a storm of further musical changes, and ultimately results in the departure of a primary band member. Given all of this, does the album still manage to deliver? More on that later. This is the second album to feature both David Coverdale on vocals and Glenn Hughes on bass and vocals. And I should probably admit a bias here. I'm pretty partial to virtually anything these two guys do musically, whether it's this or their stints in Whitesnake and Black Sabbath respectively. Follow the musical output of Coverdale and Hughes and you'll likely find something great. The album was produced by Martin Birch, one of 10 albums Birch would handle for the band. As mentioned in previous episodes, Birch was a pretty big producer, having also done classic albums for Black Sabbath, Rainbow, Whitesnake, and perhaps more relevant to this audience, 9 incredible records for Iron Maiden. For more info on Birch and other classic producers, check out my top 10 video on rock and metal record producers. Standout tracks include Lady Double Dealer, Highball Shooter, and the title track, Stormbringer.
Stormbringer coming!
This would be Ritchie Blackmore's final album with Deep Purple before he moved on to Rainbow in June of 1975. A decision Blackmore made purportedly due to his dissatisfaction with the funk and soul elements on the album. Musical additions no doubt brought into the band by the newer members. Blackmore was also rather infamous with having problems with his singers. Perhaps an ego thing, or control issues, or simple incompatibility. It all depends on who you ask. And for those collectors who enjoy acquiring records with mistakes on them, there exists a mispress version of the album, which contains the side B of Burn on Stormbringer's side B, even though the labels are properly printed. Stormbringer has been continuously pressed to vinyl since its initial release, the latest edition of which was issued by Rhino Records in 2020 on purple vinyl and limited to 2,300 copies. Regarding the Coverdale era of Deep Purple, I'd certainly recommend Stormbringer, but you should also check out the previous and admittedly heavier album, Burn, often more of the fan favorite for this era. For the purist, this band lineup, known as Mark III, is a bit controversial, lacking classic members Ian Gillan and Roger Glover. And it certainly wasn't a critic's favorite back in the mid-70s. Despite that, Stormbringer is a strong work with some clear talent on it. If you can get past the loss of some of their previous lineup, there is still plenty to love about this record. Give it a spin. Following on the heels of other lo-fi debut efforts from the likes of bands like Possessed and Voivod, Canadian thrashers Sacrifice show that there's more to making a memorable metal album than mere production value. After locally shopping a series of rehearsal tapes, which included early versions of Turn in Your Grave and Warriors of Death, the band recorded a demo called The Exorcism in June of 1985. All of this, along with an opening gig for Exodus, led to Sacrifice being signed by Fringe Records to their imprint label Diabolic Force, for whom they recorded their debut album in the fall of 1985. And I'm going to state this up front, the production on Torment and Fire is pretty awful. Not unlistenable awful, but definitely awful. The album was produced by Toronto record store employee, punk singer, and DJ Brian Taylor. This was some of Taylor's earliest production as well, so that might explain the quality here. But he would go on to produce the next two Sacrifice albums, which have markedly improved production quality. Taylor also produced albums for fellow Canadians Slaughter and Razor. Plenty of killer tracks on this one, including Burned at the Stake, Homicidal Breath, and my favorite, Turn in Your Grave.
Darkness surrounds you, there is no escape. As I touch you, your mind is full of hate. By the force of evil, you are my slave. Turn in your grave.
It's clear that Sacrifice aren't performing straight thrash here, but also seem somewhat influenced by early and even proto-death metal bands to a degree. Likely Possessed and Venom, and maybe a little Bathory as well. This might lead some to believe that the sound on Torment and Fire isn't merely bad production, but also an emulation of their influences' recorded efforts. After all, they were teenagers when they made this album. Regardless, what do you think about Torment and Fire? Let me know in the comments below. Vinyl reissues for Torment and Fire really didn't start to appear until the 2010s. Most notable is the 2017 reissue from Canada's War on Music label, with vinyl variants in black, 500 copies, red, 400 copies, and clear splatter, 100 copies. According to the band's Twitter feed, Sacrifice are working on new material as of December 2019 in preparation for a new album. No release date as of yet. Lizzy Borden's third studio album gave them the relative success that had previously eluded them. But even with this attention paid to them, could they maintain this momentum going forward? Part of the success of Visual Lies can be attributed to producer Max Norman, who handled the first 4 Ozzy Osbourne albums, as well as records for Y&T, Loudness, Armored Saint, and others. If wondering why the massive increase in production quality for this band happened on this album, you can thank Max Norman for that. The band's success was achieved in spite of what many could argue was a pretty disastrous choice in personal image. Put bluntly, Lizzy Borden's stage look might have been intended for shock in order to get attention, but for many, it was ridiculously off-putting and stopped quite a few from actually giving their music a chance. Music that was often pretty good. And it's at least a little heavier than the band's image would lead you to believe, especially when put against their contemporaries. Above all, my favorite track is the single from the album, known as Me Against the World.
It's me against the world. Me against the world.
And speaking of this track, Me Against the World had a music video in promotion of the album. Although unintentional, it's yet another good example of both a terrible image contrasted by a decent track. This same track gained further mileage by appearing in the 1988 heavy metal horror movie Black Roses, notably in its opening scene. And although the band itself isn't in the movie, Black Roses did feature on-screen performances by members of King Cobra and Quiet Riot. Also, you might remember director John Fasano's previous film, Rock and Roll Nightmare, featuring power metal legend Thor in the lead role. And if you think this is the only movie that Lizzy Borden had any involvement in, then get ready for The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2: The Metal Years, a 1988 documentary on metal. The movie spotlighted a number of up-and-coming bands, notably from Los Angeles, including Lizzy Borden, who also performed a live cover version of Born to Be Wild in the film. Sadly, there has never been a vinyl repress for Visual Lies, but Metal Blade Records did reissue the album on CD in 2002, if that's of interest. After a couple of hiatuses, Lizzy Borden returned in 2007, releasing their latest album in 2018 called My Midnight Things, also spawning a music video for the track Long May They Haunt Us. The album is available on vinyl through Metal Blade Records. Kreator's sophomore effort has been hailed by many as highly influential on thrash, black, and death metal bands throughout the last 3+ decades, proving its status as a classic album, and even despite its occasional flaws. Pleasure to Kill was produced by Harris Johns, whose resume boasts past production efforts for Gravedigger, Halloween, Coroner, and Celtic Frost. And after this, even more classic records from Voivod, Sodom, and Pestilence. Kreator's musical inspiration came largely from the metal bands they heard, chiefly Possessed, whose Seven Churches album had a notable impact on the band. And you can certainly hear the flirtation with death metal on this album as well. And some of that teenage enthusiasm they had may or may not have made up for the musical mistakes throughout. The drumming is sometimes off-tempo, and the guitars sometimes fall off time as well. Surprisingly, these mistakes don't do much to ruin the power and energy behind these otherwise well-written thrash songs. Maybe it even adds to its charm. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the occasional lack of tightness in the performances, and whether that affects your enjoyment of the record. Tracks you should hear first include Pleasure to Kill, Under the Guillotine, and without question, Riot of Violence.
Deep in the corner, passionate to kill, cut from the ground, my start to chill. A man lies in the corner, covered with blood. Bloody wounds on his body, praying for his God. People passing by, but they say, why should we care about him? He will die to die.
The cover art for Pleasure to Kill was done by Philip Lauver, who also did the cover for Execution Guaranteed for Rage, Riders of Doom for Death Row, and Slave to the Sword by Ex Mortis. Although actually produced in 2017 to promote the reissue of this album, Kreator had this music video made for the title track, which includes some older footage of the band from the era. If you haven't seen the entire video, I would highly recommend seeking it out. As mentioned before, there was a vinyl reissue of Pleasure to Kill in 2017. Released by Noise Records, this 2LP gatefold edition had been remastered and put out on 180-gram vinyl. And if you're really collecting Kreator records, seek out the 1987 picture disc edition of After the Attack, which was the same album as Pleasure to Kill, but with the track After the Attack appearing after Riot of Violence to end the A-side. If you've only heard modern Kreator, you might be thrown off by this record's raw and occasionally chaotic approach. But given the chance, you might hear why it's a thrash classic, and why you probably should have it in your own collection. The third album from metal legends Iron Maiden brought them at a crossroads between the success of their first two albums and the chance taken on a new vocalist, not to mention the social controversy surrounding the record. But without ruining too much of the plot here, the band did pretty okay for themselves. Following the Killers tour, the band had the unfortunate task of having to fire their previous singer, Paul Di'Anno, due to his drug abuse and related self-destructive behavior. The selection for a new singer happened soon after, bringing in former Samson vocalist Bruce Dickinson. And with all due respect to Di'Anno and his admittedly valuable contributions to the early Maiden material, the switch in singers was definitely an upgrade. Bassist and chief songwriter Steve Harris felt the same way, as his own writing vastly expanded with the potential of a more talented singer with an overall better range and a bombastic delivery style. And it should also be mentioned that Dickinson had a pretty big hand in co-writing the material on this record, albeit uncredited. Seems that due to some contractual entanglements with his previous band, he couldn't legally claim writing credit. But it's pretty obvious that he had collaborated on the songs. Virtually every track on this album is amazing, but my go-to songs are The Number of the Beast, Invaders, and especially Hallowed Be Thy Name.
When the priest comes to read me the last rites, take a look to the boughs of the last sites of a wall that has gone very wrong for me. Can it be that there's some sort of error not to stop the surmounting terror? Is it really the end, not some crazy dream?
Regarding the title track, the song's spoken word introduction is from chapters 12 and 13 of the Book of Revelation from the Bible and is read by voice actor Barry Clayton, who was later known as the narrator for the Count Duckula animated TV show. He wasn't the band's first choice, however. Vincent Price was approached earlier on, but they couldn't afford Price's, well, price. As for the album art, the services of established Maiden cover artist Derek Riggs were once again employed. But what singles out this cover from all of the other Maiden albums is that this, plus the album title, and no doubt its title track, brought the band some unexpected controversy. Given that it was the 1980s and the era of social conservatism, it's not exactly a stretch to imagine that an album called The Number of the Beast might get you some negative attention. Conservative groups, notably religious ones, accused the band of being devil worshippers, resulting in public record burnings and boycotts, as well as demonstrations outside music venues where the band played. And as you can imagine, none of this halted record sales, as The Number of the Beast went gold in the US the following year, and platinum by 1986. It also peaked at number 33 on the Billboard 200 chart. Singles released in promotion for this album included the title track, as well as Run to the Hills, which had a music video featuring live footage interspersed with clips from the silent films of Buster Keaton. The video was simple enough, but showcased the then-current lineup in top form. As for vinyl reissues of the album, there have been a slew of them throughout the decades. The most recent being the 2017 release by BMG on 180-gram vinyl. There was also a 2014 reissue from Parlophone Records Limited as part of a series of Iron Maiden reissues from 2014 to 2017. The Number of the Beast has been a fan favorite, a genre favorite, and a critic's favorite for decades. If you're one of the 3 metal fans on the planet who's never heard it, well, get to it. If you're a fan of the Vinyl Reacquisition Project, you'll definitely want to pick up an official VRP t-shirt. Log on to the website listed below for ordering details and get yours today. Thanks for watching the Vinyl Reacquisition Project. And if you haven't checked out the rest of the channel, you definitely should. I produce about a half a dozen shows on metal vinyl collecting and other related topics. Definitely check it out when you have the chance. As for this video, if you like what you saw, definitely give it a like and also share with your friends. And if you haven't subscribed, of course, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of each and every video I produce. And if you're a regular viewer of this channel and you want to support the network a little further, definitely check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/theaccusationnetwork. You can find all the bonus material there, and you can also see the videos up to 7 days in advance from everyone else. So definitely check it out. And as always, see you next month.